Chapter 5 The Blythe Girls, Helen, Margie, and Rose by Laura Lee Hope. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5 Good News. Thanks to Joe Morris and their own exertions, dinner that evening was not such a hectic affair as it had been the night before. The heat had marred their appetites, but the food soothed and rested them. Rose had bought a paper of a passing newsboy and, during the meal, had sat with the want advertisement section spread out beside her plate, devouring the sheet as though it were a page from the Arabian Nights. "There are no ends of places for you, Margie," she said once, looking up to regard her sister enviously over the top of the paper. "All you have to do is just step out and grab a place for a typist, steno, or private secretary." "Don't I wish it were as simple as all that!" exclaimed Margie ruefully, as she munched on a piece of celery. "I imagine I'll have to do more than just put my head in the grab bag, kid. Rose." Rose looked up suspiciously from her paper, but Margie's expression was grave enough to lull her suspicions to rest. She returned to a perusal of the paper. "There are plenty of ads for file clerks, but that's one thing I know I haven't any talent for." "The only one," murmured Margie wickedly, and Helen threw her a warning glance. But Rose was far too deeply absorbed in her occupation to notice the sarcasm. "Look, here it is!" she cried in triumph, running around the table so that Helen might share her joy. "Here is the very position I've been looking for." She held a white finger over a particular place in the column, and Helen read an advertisement for a clerk in a department store. "Good salary to start and splendid opportunities for advancement." "I hope you get it, dear, or one like it," said Helen as she rose to remove the dishes. "We surely do need a wage earner in this family right away." But in spite of the need, it seemed for a weary while as though no one of the three Blythe girls was to be permitted to earn any money at all. They soon learned that, in spite of the glittering promises of the want advertisements, employers of all sorts and kinds invariably demanded one thing of them: experience. And that one thing they did not have. It hampered them terribly. They began to hate the very word, experience. It seemed that without that elusive thing, they were to be denied even a decent living in that great, heartless city which their reading had endowed with so much glamour. "But you have to get your experience somewhere," Rose had wailed after one particularly discouraging day. "All those experienced people have to start sometime, and when they start have to start like us, without experience." "There are a few positions that don't demand experience," Helen reminded her gently. "But you say yourself you won't even consider them." "And I won't!" cried Rose passionately, almost in tears. "I could have been an errand girl running around all day for a little bit of money that wouldn't begin to cover expenses." "But if it gave you experience," suggested Helen, still more gently, but Rose only shook her head stubbornly. "I would rather starve," she said, and the older girl knew she meant it. If only there were money to train the girl for some special occupation or profession, she thought wistfully, but there was not. There was not enough to make it possible even for Helen to continue her art lessons. "How much have we got left, Nell?" Margie spoke from her corner, where she had pretended to be reading a book, with such suddenness that the two girls started. Helen hesitated, pretending not to understand Margie's question. "How much what?" she evaded. "You know what I mean as well as I do," Margie told her brusquely. "I want to know how much money we have between us and starvation." Helen's fair skin suddenly became suffused with color. She turned her eyes away from Margie's searching ones. "We have just enough to last for another 2 weeks," she said in a voice that was almost inaudible. "Enough to buy us food and pay our expenses traveling back and forth?" Margie continued inexorably, and Helen nodded. "Then at the end of the 2 weeks, what do we do?" Margie's harsh young voice, too, had sunk till it was almost a whisper. "What do we do then, Nell?" "Don't ask her! You know as well as she does!" cried Rose, with a protective arm flung suddenly about her eldest sister. "If we don't find something to do before the end of this week, we'll starve, that's all. We'll not be paid in advance, you know," she added bitterly. "We have to get some money some way," said Margie, as though talking to herself. "Before the end of this week I am going to have a job." But she did not, and neither did Rose. Another week lagged on like a long nightmare, while Helen, with an ingenuity born of desperation, made each dollar do the work of three. At last it came to the point one morning when Rose and Margie left the house actually hungry. Helen, listlessly clearing up after the meal, was in even worse shape, for she, when the girls had not noticed, had given them part of her food also, knowing that they, more than she, must be sustained for the day's discouraging round. She herself had tried to work at her sketches, but was too ridden by fear and worry to accomplish anything worthwhile. Joe Morris called occasionally, but the girls were too taken up with their own problems to welcome him very cordially. Then, too, Helen knew that the family budget did not include entertaining. She could not afford to ask Joe Morris to dinner just then, and she was not willing to accept hospitality from him that she could not return. So, after several of his invitations had been refused, the young man gradually gave up calling. Rose missed him most, but it was not long before she too became so absorbed in the fight they were making to think about anything else. On this particular morning, when the girls had gone, half nourished and discouraged, from the house, Helen got out all her old sketches and looked over them carefully. She took up one which she had appropriately entitled "By the Brook." It was a pretty little scene. Just a woodland grove with some towering trees in the foreground, in the background tangled undergrowth, with a brook purling its merry way between moss-grown banks. Pretty and realistic too, but there were faults. Helen recognized them even while she was at a loss to tell just how they could be remedied. There was another, just a simple vista of hillside and trees and blowing leaves. One could see the wind in the picture, almost feel the impact of it. The wildly blowing leaves, the scudding clouds across the sky, the half-veiled sun. Yes, it was good, thought Helen, with a quick thrill of pride in her work. She had done something there, portrayed action by means of color, painted her thought upon the blank canvas. With a sigh, half of hope, half of fear, she put it down and picked up another. Not so good, this one. She had loved doing it, but it had never quite suited her. An old man sat upon a rustic bridge, fishing idly in the heat of noonday. One knew it was hot by the intense stillness of the picture. But the old man did not care. He was too engrossed in his favorite sport to think of the heat. Beside him was an old basket, containing several limp witnesses to his skill. Well done enough, that part. But the sky, there was the trouble. The sky had never been quite right. Darken it a trifle? No, that would spoil it. What if she did not, after all, possess that talent that her mother, her relatives and friends had credited her with? Suppose she was just one of those millions of poor girls deluded by the belief of future greatness, thinking they were possessed of a gift which had never been theirs. She put away the sketches drearily. It had been in her mind to take the best of the collection, find out the names and addresses of 2 or 3 art dealers from the telephone directory, and try to sell them some of her work. But it is no use, she concluded. They aren't good enough. And besides, she gave an apprehensive look at the clock, it's almost time to get lunch. Either Margie or Rose was almost sure to drop in around noon for a bite to eat and some encouragement before they began the dreary afternoon round. Encouragement, thought Helen wistfully. She had not much of that to offer them, and still less of refreshment. She was examining with clouded brow the pitifully empty pantry when the door opened and slammed and Rose came down the long hall into the kitchen. She flung off her hat and sat down in a chair, drooping wearily. "It's no use, Nell," she said. "Nobody wants me. I think I've tried about every place there is that amounts to anything, and I'm just sick and tired of living. I never thought it would be like this. I wonder what luck Margie has had." Poor Margie! She could have answered her sister's question emphatically several times that day. What kind of luck had she had? No luck at all. The worst kind of luck. But this is how it happened. Like Rose, Margie had started out hopefully enough that morning. As usual, she had scanned the list of help wanted and had selected from it the advertisements that seemed most promising. First on the list was the name of Mr. Rosenbaum, efficiency expert. This gentleman seemed badly in need of a stenographer, and something invincibly optimistic in Margie assured her that she was just the person for the place. Her optimism received its first shock, however, when she found herself in a bare cubbyhole of an outer office, in company with several other applicants for the position. There were girls of all types and classes, but whether brunettes or blondes, whether shabbily dressed or garishly dressed, there was an expression common to them all, an expression of expectancy and strain. Every time the door of Mr. Rosenbaum's inner office opened, there was an eager turning of heads, a pathetic preening of feathers, as the next in line was admitted to the presence. So the line moved slowly up until Margie found herself next to the door. Mr. Rosenbaum must be very particular, she reflected. It seemed to her that some one of the girls who had been admitted to the private office only to come out of it, weary and crestfallen, must have ability enough to fill the position of stenographer to Mr. Rosenbaum, efficiency expert. Perhaps, her heart began to beat wildly at the thought, she was to be the chosen one. If only she could go home to her sisters and tell them that the awful anxiety of the last few days was at an end, that she had secured a position, would on the morrow actually start making money, if only... A drawling, slightly nasal voice at her elbow broke rudely into the dream. "From the country, ain't you?" asked the voice, and Margie turned sharply to find the owner of it, a pert, black-eyed, gum-chewing young person. "I'm from Long Island, which isn't exactly the backwoods," Margie returned rather coldly. The girl grinned good-naturedly. "Just as bad," she said. "Ought to buy yourself some new clothes, girlie. Now, if you'd let me tell you what to get." Margie turned from her, her face flaming, just as the door of the office opened and a languid office boy appeared. He surveyed the remaining applicants with an indolent eye. Margie stepped forward eagerly. "I'm next," she began, but was waved back by a peremptory gesture of a lean and freckled hand. "Job's filled," said the youth succinctly. "You're wasting your time here." Half blinded by chagrin and disappointment, Margie found her way from the office and from the building. The pert, black-eyed girl had followed closely after her, evidently with the intention of imparting more advice upon the subject of the kind of clothes she thought Margie should wear. She was lost in front of the elevators, however, and with a sigh of relief, Margie found herself at last upon the street and alone. She felt wilted and very tired, but with a strenuous effort managed to banish the thought of fatigue from her mind. The day was just begun and there were still so many places to go. She consulted the next address on her list and started out again. Another disappointment, and another, and another. Resolutely, Margie continued the weary round while her feet began to feel like balls of fire. It was not until a creeping faintness warned her that she must rest, for a short time anyway, that she turned into a little restaurant with white-topped tables and a great clatter of dishes. The waitress brought her a plate of rolls and a cup of hot tea. The refreshment, meager as it was, brought fresh courage, and Margie sallied forth again to meet the ordeal of the afternoon. She suffered rebuff after rebuff until the dreary round became almost automatic. One address after the other, one tall, gaunt office building after another, all exactly alike. At last there was only one address left, and Margie forced herself toward it. All her self-confidence had deserted her. Her shoes were dusty. She had passed a bootblack and debated with herself whether she should spend a precious dime for a shine, had decided against the extravagance. She had caught a glimpse of herself in a mirror as she had glanced into a shop in passing, and had been startled and shocked by her reflection. That was never Margie Blythe, that drawn, haggard, white-faced girl. Then on again to the last address in the list. It was the least promising of them all, a clerkship in a lawyer's office. Margie felt sure she would not get the place, but one could not afford to overlook a chance. The office building, when she came to it, was an imposing, newly erected, very modern affair, and Margie, after putting one timid, dust-stained foot over the grandeur of its threshold, felt a wild desire to fly from the spot forever. Instead, she went stubbornly on to find herself in a large foyer with a winding stairway leading into the upper regions and a double set of elevators on either side of the stairway. Choosing the stairs as a less conspicuous means of ascent than the elevator, Margie mounted to the second floor and found herself hopelessly confused by an intricate network of corridors with doors opening into them. She was forced at last to consult a pompous dignitary who patiently explained that she had misread the directions to the office of Vale and Vale, who were really located on the 16th floor. The best thing to do, he told her, with marked condescension for her ignorance, was to descend again to the main floor and from there take an express elevator to the 16th floor. Margie thanked him and made her weary way down to the first floor again. She found the express elevator at last and whirled up to the 16th floor with a speed that made her dizzy. Then again she began the puzzling hunt through the network of corridors for the right office. There it was at last, Vale and Vale, attorneys. Margie leaned against the wall for a moment to steady the trembling of her lips. Then, summoning her last drop of courage, the girl reached for the door, pushed it open.
"Hey there, shut that door! Isn't there draft enough without—"
The sharp, complaining voice paused as the owner of it surveyed Margie critically. He was a funny, dried-up little man, with bright black eyes, a hooked nose much too big for his face, and a wide, thin-lipped mouth.
"Well, who are you? Didn't you hear me say to close the door?"
Margie closed the door quickly and stood with her back against it, trembling. "I saw your advertisement in the paper," she began in a weak voice. "I have come to apply for the position, if it's not already filled."
"Job's filled,"
snapped the unpleasant little man, turning his back squarely upon her.
"Shut the door quickly after you. I have a dreadful cold."
Out in the corridor again, Margie wondered whether she ought to laugh or cry. The whole thing would have been ludicrous had it not been so nearly tragic. What to do now? Where to go? Home? Confess that she had failed again? Not yet. Not while there was one forlorn little hope left. For that morning, scanning the Help Wanted column, she had come across a 2-line advertisement. A lady by the name of Miss Pepper needed a social secretary. Margie had noted this address with the others, but had not seriously considered investigating it. Social secretary? The idea of Margie Blythe in that capacity brought a grim little smile to her lips. Then she straightened with a swift resolution. "I won't be a quitter," she told herself. "I will go and see this Pepper person, if it's the last thing on earth I do." Helen was getting an all too inadequate dinner, and Rose was helping her listlessly when they heard the sound of a key turning in the lock. The hall door opened and slammed shut. Even Rose, discouraged as she was, straightened up eagerly at the sound. It was not a defeated sound. Somehow it had a note of triumph in it. Margie's voice came to them before Margie herself appeared. "It's all right, girls. Everything's all right. I've got it." End of chapter 5.